the Pacific Northwest. And those of you that are waiting for a nice melodious voice, no, this is my normal speaking voice, so sorry to disappoint. Anyway, my name's Chris Pinckney. I'm from Portland State University, the Portland that's in Oregon, not the real Portland. In Maine, I'm here to talk a little bit about Tier 2 supports for high school students. And so what I plan to do is talk a little bit about kind of what are some desirable features and then give a specific example with something that we call academic seminar, which is a Tier 2 support. So, since I assume that people are coming here as teens, and I don't seem to be disappointed, I've given you a question to ponder as we get started. Now, this is a bit of a doozy. In today's school context, whatever that is for you, how do we effectively support the social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health needs of students while creating or preserving a positive high school experience and maintaining progress towards graduation requirements? Bit of a mouthful, right? So what I'm going to do is give you a couple of minutes within your table teams to ponder this. What are some ideas? What are some things you've observed? But really get you into the mindset of what we're going to talk about for the next 60 minutes or so. So take about 2 minutes and think as a group. Please take another minute or so. All right, let's come back together. So here's what we're going to do. You can either, because I learned previously about giving choice, you can either make your way to a microphone if you have any questions or things to share, or you can just scream at me, and I will try to repeat it into the microphone that's been lovingly placed in front of me. So your choice. I know after lunch you may choose to stay where you're at. Okay, so ideas about this question. Must be these lights preventing me from seeing all the hands. Go for it.
I think building relationships with the kids, so then they're able to, talk to you about their social, emotional, behavioral, mental health needs, and then the academics kind of fall behind it.
Yeah, great. I love it. Right. So really building those relationships and using those to leverage any other supports. Great recommendation. Right. Makes sense.
The online group said they've had some great success with using restorative practices.
So yeah, absolutely. Restorative practices. Thinking about, again, and the thing that I appreciate about restorative practices is you don't wait until something bad happens, right? You think about, again, creating an environment that is worth restoring. And you do that first, and then you actually think about how am I supporting the student and others and repairing any kind of harm rather than, excluding this person, right, from this environment. So restorative practices, absolutely.
Another one from online, a quick daily survey of students' mental wellness with an option to see a counselor during the day.
Yeah, and so doing surveys, gathering data on everyone, great tier 1 practice. They're thinking about kind of where folks are with their social emotional health, and then access to support during the day, right? You don't have to get into that long line. So definitely some ways to kind of address this very long and arduous task that I've presented on the screen. Anyone else? Maybe one more group. Yes.
Some of the districts that we work with have kind of almost like a homeroom. And so that
All right, so thinking about your schedule, right? Because in high schools, the schedule is the king, right? Or whatever high-ranking role you want it to be called, okay? And if you have things built in within your schedule to really be thinking about supporting students, you're gonna be much better off, right? So having a homeroom in which you can provide some of these supports for students, and it's not an ad hoc thing. It's not a once someone shows need thing as much as it is we know this is going to be an issue, right? And so let's address it, particularly when I talk about it, it's for students that are just entering high school, right? What the research will tell you is things kind of go bad, right? Folks are like, oh, you're counting now? When we talk about credits and things of that nature. Yeah, we're counting. And we count from the moment you step into the classroom. And sometimes it takes a semester or so for folks to figure that out. So having that within the master's schedule is definitely a recommendation. All right, so here's what I have come to. As you've been talking, I've been listening. I apparently don't need to give this presentation because there is enough stuff in this room where I can just be like, hey, go do it, and then y'all tell me about it and let me write it down because that's how I make my living. But I'll go ahead and try anyway, all right? All right, so one of the things that I want to see, and I'm going to put this out there, and if it doesn't jibe with how you experience high school, say, you're wrong, or as I learned, that's lame. So I'm going to say there's a couple of contentions that I have. Many high schools have a number of available school and community supports for students. Does that jibe with what people have experienced? Yeah, there's a lot of things. I would also say not everyone in those buildings or on those facilities know about all those supports, right? I would also say supports in many high schools are often administered by different departments and personnel. So if you need something that's like related to academics, you may have a team that's within that academic department. If you were a student receiving special education supports and services, you may have your supports delivered by the SPED department, right? Same thing for English learners and all these other things, right? Multilingual learners, right? So with so much time in high schools being spent responding to pressing issues, communication is often a challenge, right? Would y'all be willing to buy that? Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit about me. I live in Portland now, but I'm originally from a not so little town, but not so big town of Long Beach, California. So when I went to school in Long Beach in high school, my high school had 5,000 students, right? Now, I've checked New York City. There's a couple of spots there with larger student populations, but 5,000 students is a lot. And when you think about 5,000 students, you also have the adult personnel supporting those students. And I can only imagine the communication challenges that they had when trying to think about how do we actually try to support all 5,000 of these students and their families. Thankfully, it was the 90s, so that wasn't that important, right? So cheers for me being old. So one of the things I want to offer you is this idea of how do we avoid the silo? And one of the things I would like to share is this thing called the Interconnected Systems Framework. And so this is not my work, right? If you want to find out more about this, go on to pbis.org. Susan Barrett, Lucille Eber, lots of very important people have done work in this. But here's the premise. How do we think about the different needs as we're building the system, right? So we started off with PBIS, where my heart is, right? All about social behavior. And then we were like, man, social emotional learning is super important. Man, we got trauma. We've got lots of different things. And anybody that's been in education more than a few years has recognized, especially after that whole COVID situation, that there's a lot of needs. And rather than building upon a foundation a piece at a time, you want to be thinking about how can we build a foundation, right, that's modular, where you can actually prioritize and include different needs while still retaining the same framework. And so one thing that I'm going to talk about is how do you create that framework? And so it starts off with, surprise, a strong tier one, okay? Strong tier one. And I'll talk a little bit about that. All right, so universal foundations have some things in place that you do for all students. And as my colleagues talked about in the presentation before lunch, do those things for all students, right? Don't exclude a population of students based upon their particular needs or how much time they're on campus or whatever else, right? If it's universal, it should be just that, okay? And so when we talk about tier one and universal foundations, teach the things you want people to demonstrate rather than lament that they don't do them, okay? Now, I was a teacher for 7 years, and I taught alternative high school. Basically, I taught a bunch of students, and I'll just say this, that went on to murder people, right? Now, I don't say that lightly. At one point early in my career, I used to count the number of times or the number of students that actually got prosecuted for murder. At last count, I was at 10. And then I transitioned into special education because of my size, which used to be better back in the day. I did play football after all, and watched my team get decimated by the University of Michigan. It was bad, but I didn't play, so I was happy. But in doing that work, I got the students that were the most violent, right? So when I talk about this in terms of my early career, I had students that they weren't just talking, they were actually acting, right? And then I had students that could do less of the talking, but they were certainly still acting, right? And then I transitioned into supporting older students, and that was too easy. That's when I said I had to go get a doctorate, right? Because what I found out from that was your community is really important. I could teach kids all kind of stuff, but if the community didn't have opportunities, right, things didn't necessarily work out for those students. So not what I'm talking about today, but those connections to the community, super important, right? Not just for students that are quote unquote diverse, but just because those are the places in which your students and families are living. And so having a connection that goes beyond school, I think, is a really important thing to do, right? Just my little soapbox moment. Okay? All right, so again, you know about all this stuff. I'll just talk about a few things that I call academic enablers. So this isn't necessarily, okay, a student is struggling in algebra or struggling in some other subject matter. It's things that support kind of performance, academic performance across a range of topics, a range of areas. And I'm going to talk about a few of those later on, but I'm sure you're thinking about some of them. Like, hey, being organized kind of helps. Yeah, it does. How many of your students are sufficiently organized? Given your intake of coffee and whatever happened in your personal life, how many of you are sufficiently organized, right? Let's be honest. Come on, sometimes it's better than others. And so thinking about how do we teach a set of skills, and more importantly, not just introduce them, but support their use so that students actually become independent in using them. That's going to support them across a range of topics. So I may not necessarily teach you, how to solve this particular function, but I'm definitely going to teach you where to look to get some help, right? Things you already know, define expectations, reinforce them, all these things. Again, I was here the last presentation. You all are well versed in this. I'm going to keep going, right? Define, teach, reinforce, looks familiar. And the thing that I want to point out is this, and so here's my contention with some things that I observe. Now, this is way on the West Coast in Oregon, right? So this probably doesn't apply to the great state of Michigan. But one of the things that I've come across in my work over the last decade or so is that a lot of people will introduce something. They will introduce a strategy or a set of skills with the assumption that it's magically going to be used independently. But we're too smart for that, right? The reason why I don't, let's say, do things that would be helpful to my life is not because I'm unaware of them typically. It's because there's other things, right, that interfere, right? Or I choose to make other decisions. It's not because I don't understand that, hey, maybe my teenage daughters need a positive male role model, and I should show that by being like, hey, what do you think? How can I be more supportive of you? I know those things. Yeah, I don't always do those things, right? But I know that I should do them. So again, when we talk about teaching students or supporting students within a high school, a lot of the stuff they actually know, right? There are behaviors that may be in their repertoire. The key is, how do you convince them to use those behaviors, right? And how do you give them fertile ground to practice those behaviors, right? And now a lot of that is the tier 2 environment. Smaller group size where people can be safe, right? To try something different, right? And so we'll talk about more of that later. The other thing is treat self-management, whether it's academic self-management, or medical self-management or any of those things, treat it like an academic skill, meaning you would not just introduce it and never talk about it again, right? I assume that if I don't have a ton of current teachers, most of you have been teachers in some capacity. Did you ever tell someone else, here's what you should do? The first week, introduce topics, and then never talk about them again. That's going to work great. No one's ever given that advice, right? So again, as we're thinking about the same things with academic, where we're thinking about judicious review and having students practice and expand upon their ability to use things, we need to be thinking about that for self-management skills as well, right? Or any other skills that you would associate with a Tier 2 intervention. All right, some goals for implementation. You want to preserve students' access to content area courses for lots of reasons. One, because they're counting credits, right? Like, oh man, we got you into a lot of support classes, but none of those were actually credit accruing classes. Sorry. Feel free to stay with us another year, student, right? They're like, I'm working real hard and you're telling me I'm not actually making progress. Hope this isn't offensive. Feels like my student loans. We want to preserve access to elective courses, right? So my background is in special education. And what often happens with students that have access to an entitlement program like special education or like, let's say, supports for English language development is that those supports take the place of the courses that the students really want to take, right? So I really wanted to learn something about computer programming. But I can't because I've got to take the support course. And so not only are we removing some of the things that are going to keep students within the school environment, we're just making school lamer than it needs to be. But as been pointed out previously, there's only so many hours in the day and so many people to do the work, right? So we got to really be thinking about how do we create a system, right, that allows us to do so many of the things that are needed. And then again, effectively and efficiently support the needs of all students, support students' self-determination. And I say that not because it's unimportant, but because you've heard these things before. All right, so some critical features of Tier 2, these are generic. Link whatever you have as goals or expectations to your school-wide expectations. So Tier 2 shouldn't be a completely different place, right? Now, we wanted you to be safe, responsible, and respectful when you're out there in Gen Pop. But when you're in here, we want, right? You can still use those same words, but again, talk about how they function within the environments the kids are in, right? So what does it mean to be safe within a class in which you're going to be asked to practice things that may be hard for you, right? What does it mean to be respectful when that word is so charged, right? What does respect really mean? Well, it depends on the day and who you're talking to, right? And so again, it's about teaching those things and more so than just presenting these ideas, supporting students in actually doing these things, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. So I'm not gonna read all of these things, but timely intervention, students shouldn't have to languish for an entire quarter before they actually receive some of these supports. There should be communication across the providers, also communication with folks at home, and there should be opportunities, I would say more opportunities than typical, to practice the very skills that you're trying to teach within these settings, okay? So again, and I'm only talking about the West Coast here, because most of my work is over there, but I often see things being introduced, classes being created, but none of the support to actually do the things occurring, right? Remember when we had that lesson 6 months ago about organizing your backpack? You should be doing that, okay? Have you prompted that? Have you looked at a backpack? Have you put any contingencies in place for having your things organized? No? Then guess what? Student wasn't doing it before for a reason. You introducing it is not likely to change their mind, okay? So again, I want to leave with this idea for Tier 2. Can't just introduce these things. You got to teach them as well as you would teach an academic content, right? Meaning that students should retain and practice throughout the year, not just during the particular lesson or week or unit, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. All right. So I'm going to talk about this thing that I call academic seminar. You probably haven't heard of it. If you have, probably because my colleague told you about it. Colleague used to work for the Midwest PBIS Technical Assistance Center, not me. So we'll talk about academic seminar as an example of a Tier 2 support in high school. So I'll talk about what it is, how to implement it, and how to actually evaluate it. Okay. Now, I will say I probably have more slides here than I need, but that's for you. Enjoy them. You'll notice there's not a lot of colorful backgrounds or things, not because I didn't want to look up colorful backgrounds, it's because I wanted you to have almost a blank canvas for you to repurpose these slides for whatever you need them, right? Right? That sounded convincing. Those that are in the room gave me a few courtesy nods, and I'm going to take that as being representative of the entire group. All right, so here's a definition. Academic seminar is a class designed to address work avoidance behaviors for middle and high school students at risk for poor school outcomes. And we're finding more of those outcomes are appearing every year. Okay, so you have to decide on what they are. The curriculum targets teaching, practicing, and reinforcing organizational and self-advocacy skills, collectively termed academic self-management. Okay, so that's what this thing is. People did some research. My colleagues and I didn't just invent this. We didn't just sit down and say, you know what would be a good idea? What if we taught kids things? And then all collectively gave each other high fives, right? Because that's a pithy statement. Teach kids things. We actually looked at some research about kind of how things have been taught. Particularly, you'll see here some information around supporting students with learning disabilities, right? Which should be, I should say, if you're at a comprehensive campus, the number one area in which students receive, let's say, special education support, but more broadly, boy, oh boy, students may not have a diagnosis, but some of the characteristics are definitely in play with our students, right? Especially after recent history and how education was for many of them, okay? Talked about best practicing and teaching. We scaffold things to the level that students are at to build them to the things that we want to observe. So it changes a little bit depending upon who you have. So many of you later on may say, hey, Chris, you gave us access to a curriculum, and what do we do after the curriculum runs out? And I say, well, what do your students need? What are they doing? Because while I can write a curriculum, I unfortunately have never met any of your students, right? And if you want a dude raised in Southern California and choosing to live in Portland, Oregon, to tell you how to teach your students, then what I've seen on the news about this area is completely wrong, right? You all have expertise and skill that you should use for your students, right? So that's my long-winded way of saying we give you the starting point, but ultimately you've got to make it fit your context, okay? So PBIS tells us create systems of support to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. I would agree with that. One of the things that I do in my day job is I train teachers. And teachers right now, at least in Oregon, come back and they say, boy, oh boy, our caseloads are too big. Kids have too many needs. And it's just, if I had more time, I could do this or that. And I say, yeah. Well, given that you're not going to get more time, you have to become more efficient. And so because someone once told me you should share things about yourself, I'll talk about my grandmother for about 15 seconds. So my grandmother, as many of your grandmothers, was, in my mind, a great cook. And as I got older and learned a few things, I was like, not only is the food good, but her process is very, very efficient for producing the food, right? Clean as you go, right? Know the recipe by heart. There's no trying to keep the phone lock screen off while looking up what the next step is. She was just doing stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And the food was good. I then later learned not to look too closely at what she was putting into the food, because my grandmother from Alabama. And she cooked like she was from Alabama. Okay? It was delicious, but you didn't want to know what was in it. And so I only bring that up to say this, especially as you're thinking about what I assume you're dealing with, which is a lot of relatively new people coming into the role as teachers and other support providers, is really be thinking about what does it take for people to become more efficient at what they do. And this is for the adults, right? It's not just knowing what to do. It's not just practicing it. But what are some of the other things, right? Feedback, right? Refinement, opportunities to fail. Now, if that's what the adults need, and they're being paid, by the way, what might your students need to learn to use new skills? Okay? So just keep that, again, in the back of your mind as you think about your early career educators. All right. So you heard a little bit about check-in, check-out earlier. Some have talked about academic seminar as kind of the second layer. So it has many of the same goals, but recognizes that things have to be a little bit different for students in high school. So for example, while some students may in fact take their behavioral report card and dutifully give it to each teacher, that may not happen, right? Doesn't mean that those students, even though they're older and sometimes not nearly as cute as they once were, they still need that support and they still need feedback and they still need to know that someone was paying attention to them, even if they don't necessarily like outward expressions of it, okay? And so from that standpoint, we're going to think about what are the needs of our students around feedback, around goal setting. And we're going to try to make it work for an older population, right? Now, as I say that, some of you might be in your pocket right now carrying around a behavioral report card about your performance at this symposium. But I would bet that you're not. So think about, among the many things that I've asked you to think about, to what extent are the things that you're teaching generalizable to life outside of school and after school? Because if there's a huge discrepancy, how responsive are we being to our students? Just something to consider, okay? And then link to content area classes as much as possible, because at the end of the day, this has been my experience working with high schools, I can get many people to implement something, but the students themselves are like, I just need some time to do my work. Give me some space free of chaos where I can do my work. And so sometimes that's all students need. Other times they need that support and that space, okay? So one of the biggest kind of people to give feedback on this program have been students, and I'll just give you a pro tip. Start off by saying we're going to teach a set of skills as well as give you time to do your work, right? Because otherwise they're like, I just need time to do my work, okay? And if kids just need time to do their work, maybe they don't need this class. Maybe they just need a space to do the work, right? All right, so more intensive extension of universal tier. So what do I think I know about Tier 2 supports? You increase things like structure and predictability. You increase the access to things like reinforcement, right? I say this term reinforcement, and then I get all upset when people use the term incorrectly. So I'll just say this, forget reinforcement. People need to be acknowledged for the things that they do or attempt to do. And that acknowledgement can look very different depending on who you are, right? That's where I get that culturally sustaining, culturally responsive piece in. I personally don't like a bunch of public praise, because I'm like, why do you feel the need to tell me this publicly? What were you thinking about me previously? I mean, again, if you have to go out of your way to be like, you're doing a good job today. You may have had some preconceptions about what you expected from me, right? And I say it as a joke, but the best jokes have some truth to them, okay? So again, it's going to vary based upon your students. Doesn't mean that I don't need to be acknowledged, just means that maybe you don't want to do it in front of everybody, right? And then we also teach this self-management skill set. We teach it explicitly, but more importantly, we practice it, we prompt it. We get students to a level of performance where we believe that they can do it independently, okay? All right, what is academic seminar? What it is not. It is not your solution to everything, especially for kids in crisis. Kid comes to you and saying, I'm thinking about ending my life. Don't put them in academic seminar and say, if your backpack were better organized, you might feel better about your life, right? While mathematically, there could be a very small correlation. That isn't the way I would do it. Okay? It also isn't the answer to everything. So for example, if a kid is really struggling in a core academic class, not because, right, they just need more time, but because they don't know the content and the way in which it's being taught is either too advanced, too fast-paced, or something's not quite working with their learning. Academic seminar in and of itself, right, is not going to address that. However, academic seminar can be used as a hub by which to organize other supports. right? So schools that have done this, they basically say, here's the time where we're going to have students, person that knows math, can you come in or can I send them to you during this time, right? So use it as an organizational space, again, to get students the help they need, but also teach this broad set, of self-management skills and strategies. All right, again, not a solution for everything. I used to have a picture of a kitchen sink, but then the sink didn't have lots of dishes in it. So people kind of lost the metaphor, meaning don't put everything in the kitchen sink into any single class. Have a purpose, have some goals. That way you can actually measure if it's effective, rather than saying, here's our tier 2 support, right? That actually doesn't work too well, okay? All right, so let's talk about students. For whom might this be appropriate? Well, I know some people don't like this term, but students that are at risk for failing a course. How do you know they're at risk? Well, they're first-year high school students. I'm going to assume that more are going to be at risk than others, right, than later. If students during their progress reports have, let's just say, some grades that are not ideal. Currently, with so many schools using online management things where students can see their grades throughout the time, well, are they actually turning in assignments? If so, how are they doing on them? If we're talking about classes and you're assessing student proficiency, how are they doing there? So any of those indicators can show, are people at risk of failing? Okay? Students aren't making sufficient progress, right? We give the example of the black hole backpack. Students carry a backpack, and it's kind of like, right, that one recipe. Not going to say my grandmother's, but that one recipe where someone says, oh, no, don't worry, it's in there, right? But reality is, if you can't access it when called upon, it's not helping you, okay? So I like to tell stories. A couple weeks ago, and this was an indicator that I am growing old. One of the teachers that I trained is now the principal. I'm like, dang, right? And is great at it. I'm like, you inspire me. So I go to his school because he still thinks highly of me, and I'm watching actual high school students do stuff. And boy, oh boy, did I see some black hole backpacks, right? Kids are like, hold on, it's in there, wait, right? Kid comes out, their assignment or their notes page looked like a well-worn restaurant menu. Had every single dish left a little mark on it, right? It was crumbled up in a way that's not origami-like, but the student was very happy that they had it. Now, when they tried to write on it, that's another story, right? Writing on creases, not the easiest time. You don't believe me? Go try it, okay? And so when we talk about things around organization, that's a huge deal in high school. And I would say more so for many students than it had been at any other time in their academic career. And so you can just say, be organized, but any of you that have high school students that you currently love, or high school students that you formerly loved, or former high school students that you still love, you just telling them to do this, how effective was it? Think about your future. That's all I needed to hear, Mom. Now I'm ready, right? I learned the hard way with my kids. They probably need a little bit more than me telling them the obvious. Do your schoolwork. Be nice to your teacher. All things they already know, right? But even my oldest daughter, who I've got to say, much better student than I ever was, what I found is, in her interactions with teachers, that's where she needed support. It wasn't about the assignments. It wasn't about learning. She was like, I don't think this is right, and I don't know how to address that with this teacher. Okay, let me show you something, right? And I say, Dad's got a PhD in education. Feel free to call me in if you need to. That works most of the time. Sometimes it doesn't. So what are some things you consider, right? And so as I use this symposium as a bit of a reunion, because myself and many others, as been previously stated, all kind of got our doctorates at the University of Oregon. And one of the things that a now retired advisor of ours would say, what is the smallest thing that you can do to have the biggest impact, right? Because what we're not going to do is create more hours in the day. Even if people did, I don't think I'd spend it working. Just gonna be honest with you, right? And so when we think about that idea of efficiency and the idea of really impactful change, what are those things? And how do we implement them? Because we can't do everything, right? I tried, didn't work, okay? What is the one thing you need all high school students to do that would make a world of difference in school and home? So is there a single thing that you would prioritize over others? Right? Matter of fact, I'll ask you for real. Is there a thing, even if it's not the only thing, that you would say, if students did this, things would be better for them and for me? Anyone willing to share? Come to school. Show up to where we've got all the good stuff. Yeah, that helps. Attendance does matter. Be on time, right? Or at least closer to, right? We'll make progress. We don't necessarily need to fix it. But, get there in enough time for us to actually do the things. And maybe when you come in, you're not necessarily trying to recruit all the attention. Any other things? Self-regulation. Ooh, that's a big one. I think that's almost like a cheat code. Because what does that really mean? Because me, on paper, I look impressive. I really do. But boy, there's some times where I'm not self-regulated, right? When I'm watching both a movie and 2 YouTube channels at the same time. It's a real thing. Thanks for laughing. That wasn't a joke. That was a cry for help. But when I really think about it, it's like I'm not being very self-regulated. So it's not necessarily magically fixing it where you're always self-regulated, but knowing you can, with support, when you need to be, right? Because I actually like being dysregulated. I like watching too many stimuli, right? I like not having a plan for what I cooked that night, just throwing some stuff together, okay? And I do that because my job is typically very, very structured, right? So that's my little rebellious thing. Oh, you want me to have a lesson plan and a syllabus? I'll show you. No one's there to watch, so. Anyway. All right, so let's talk about this class, and then I'm going to give you another time to think as a team. All right, so it is a class. Now, what you see on the screen, or what you might see in the slides if you have them, is a 45-minute version. I have seen people do this with longer classes, 90-minute classes. It just means that you kind of prorate this or scale it to a longer period, okay? And so typically that class starts off with an entry task. What is an entry task, you may ask? Well, it's something that students do at the beginning, so they're not sitting there waiting for you, right? And this entry task often is about reviewing or actually using the skills that you teach. So if we talk about organization, what are some organizational skills? Guess what? We're going to start you off by doing that. Okay? What assignments did you get this week? Where are you with each of them? Oh, yeah. And actually providing that time, not just assuming that students do that on their own somewhere, okay? And then there's a short lesson about an actual skill. And I'll talk about those skills in a little bit, okay? And then there's some time, and this is where the students get excited, where I'm going to be there to help you as you complete your work, right? But that's not going to be all the time, okay? Again, different entry tasks, skill lessons, supported work completion, okay? Here's some examples. Looking at homework, right? Think about how expectations actually apply to your life or how you might talk about that. Let's say, again, if students are in 10th grade or beyond, what would you say to a first-year student around these expectations and what they mean, right? Or around the importance of this skill, okay? Because, again, I will say this, and I'm biased because I am a teacher. When I actually had to teach it is when I understood it, right? So if I was doing it, but if I had to explain it to someone else, I had a better understanding of it. And I'm a person that teaches about reading. I can always do it, but actually having to try to explain it, what actually occurs and what needs to occur, made me much better in terms of my understanding. So I think having students do that for either folks in younger grades or people who are just entering the class is a great way to reinforce their understanding, okay? All right. So here are some things. Here are the set of academic self-management skills: goal setting, planner use, notebook organization, test taking, studying, progress monitoring. So I'm just going to take an informal poll. Are these skills that are worth teaching? Probably, right? So what I have on the ensuing slides are probably more information than you need. I've got an example of how you might write the goal to be very explicit and observable and all those good things. You may not need that, right? But I would say this, whether you do it very formally or informally, having some kind of goal and tracking your progress towards that goal, or hopefully, or maybe, lack thereof, is an important skill, right? And these goals can start off with things that the student actually wants, not the things that you want, right? I want you to be here on time every day. Are you ready to work hard for that? And the kid's like, that wasn't my idea. I think I'm telling you fairly clearly that I don't want to be here on time and every day, right? So again, if you're going to introduce something like goal setting, make it applicable to the student, right? What do you want to learn? What do you want to get better at, okay? So again, notebook organization, you actually teach it. And again, this is West Coast, not the good state, great state of Michigan. What happens on the West Coast in many places is they do things like teach things like Cornell notes, and they're like, hey, you should all use Cornell notes. You know what I found out about Cornell notes? I actually didn't know how to take Cornell notes because what had been taught was get a piece of paper, keep your margins open, and take notes. You know what? That's not where it stops. Matter of fact, maybe the most important part of Cornell notes as a method is coming back to the information and making it more succinct. Guess what? That was never taught to me, even when I was a teacher. They didn't tell me that part. And that whole kind of reviewing stuff, which again, if you look up a protocol for Cornell notes, it's in there. But even as a professional, I wasn't taught that, okay? So again, if we talk about these organization, we're going to teach explicit ways to do it, and we're going to prompt students and acknowledge them for doing it, okay? All right, test taking, don't just do it around test time. Kids figure that out, right? One of the benefits of working in alternative education, and students were very honest with me, they were like, how come you only feed us when it's test time? I was like, that's a great point. How come you say things like try your best and then look at me funny when I think that I've tried my best and I've stopped 6 minutes into the 1 hour period, right? I'm like, that's another good question. So again, as we talk about test taking, if that's an important part of how students matriculate or earn credits, then that should be something that is a focus of your instruction, right? And something that you prompt students to do, not just during the tests that help the school out, okay? Because students now more than ever are recognizing that, okay? Study strategies, what's really studying? Again, my eldest daughter, much better student than I ever was, goes to the same high school I attended, and given my advanced age, had one of the same teachers. I was shocked. AP European History, same dude. I'm like, it's been 30 years. He was still there. And worse off, remembered me. I was like, that's scary. Now, if I can share this, and maybe I shouldn't, I was in a program that didn't have a lot of folks, let's just say, with the level of melanin that I had. And so a part of me thought about, is that why he remembers me after 30 years? I don't know. But he did. Saw my daughter's name, said, hey, are you related to so-and-so? I was like, whoa. And I was like, I wasn't a good student or a bad student. I was, however, a heavily melanated student. Anyway, he didn't say this. This is what I'm thinking, okay? And then again, student self-monitoring. So how do you know that you're making progress, okay? Whether it's completion of assignments, whether it is progress towards a goal that you've selected, how do you know, okay? And again, not just introducing these things, but supporting students in doing it. All right. So I've already asked you this, but I'll give you a little bit more time. So given those skills, that set of self-management skills, are these things that you've recognized that students that you care about or work with could use or could use more frequently, right? And is there enough need to justify essentially either creating a class or modifying an existing class that's not quite functioning the way you'd want it to, right? To address some of these teaching and supported work completion opportunities. Okay? So I'm not going to give you a lot of time to think about it, but just consider it. Because ultimately, what I'm doing here is I'm an unpaid salesman. I never accept $1 for this stuff, right? because I want you to be like, oh man, these materials are awesome. We have questions. I say, hey, just email me. That typically doesn't happen though. People give me the first email, but they never follow up. So I will say this, if you ever think you like any of this stuff and you want to talk, folks online as well, you'll see my email. Email me. Email me a question, because again, it's going to look a little bit different at each school, right? A little bit different, okay? All right, so here's another thing. You're going to see this and be like, I'm underwhelmed. But I'm going to say, I've sat in many a high school classroom watching both students and the adults, and you know what? Some of these things actually work. So here's a set of, none of these are aha skills. So these are skills that if students were to do more frequently, they actually, in fact, at least according to some of the research that I've done, have an impact on adult behavior, okay? Because the thing about high school is we can always talk about what adults need to do differently. But we know, especially in this current time, adults got a lot going on. And while they may want to do this or that, they may not actually be in a place to do this or that. So guess what? Within a community, you need helping hands across the board. So why not support the high school students in creating an environment that's helpful for them, as well as working with the adults, okay? So here's a set of skills, right? And so once upon a time, and I know this is capitalistic, but it works for some students, I use this metaphor of earning credits and expending credits, AKA debits, right? And the reason why I use this is I want people to think about there are things that you do that in the vision of an adult says, all right, I'm going to be a little bit more likely to do this or that for you. And there are things that you do that makes them think, maybe not today. One of the important things is it's not necessarily, the debits aren't bad things, right? Like if you go and you spend X amount of money on a wonderful experience for your family, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing. But it is a debit when you look at the bottom line of how much currency you have. And so some things that students do in classes are debits. Like if you ask for help 94 times, that's a debit, even if it's something that you need. Okay, so that's the metaphor. Feel free to do something else. All right, so here's the skills. Teacher greeting. You know what I found when I actually reviewed some of the research? Folks were like, you know what, at least for young kids, if you have a good greeting between the teacher and the student at the beginning of class, you can buy yourself 10 to 15 minutes of decent times. Now again, you're not teaching 10 to 15 minute classes, but boy, oh boy, I'd take 10 to 15 minutes of near bliss over some of the things that teachers are reporting to me, right? And that was associated with just having a positive interaction to start off with. Guess what? Teachers get busy. What if the student were to, in a way that the adult recognizes, greet the teacher or other adult, right? Now, again, I'm not going to be like, how do you do? My name is this. I'm excited to be here. It's not realistic for many of our students. But the things that I teach students are, you're trying to accomplish something by letting them know you came here to give them a chance at whatever they're teaching, right? And you're at least at that point in a positive enough mindset to offer a greeting, okay? Now, this can look like a lot of different things. Hey, how are you? What's going on, man? Yo, I'm back. How you doing? Common things, because again, I use these skills in my workplace. I greet people when I see them. I don't use a script. I don't say a lot of stuff. I keep it me. But I do make sure I greet people when I see them, okay? And guess what they typically do? And this is what I found in my research. The adults usually respond, right? It takes a cold teacher to be like, when someone, to the best of their ability, has greeted them, right? Doesn't mean it hasn't happened. The next thing is acknowledging support. Here's what I do, and you can ask anyone who remembers me. If you do anything for me, I'm going to tell you thank you, right? And I don't make a big deal out of it. I'm going to say, because, thank you, right? As I then put it on my Instagram account. Nothing wrong with that. But I do make sure that I acknowledge people for the things they do to help me. And that could be something as small as handing me a piece of paper, even at a symposium like this, right? Or giving me a discount on getting my brakes done, right? Always acknowledge them, okay? And it's a small thing, but what I've seen is if you do it consistently, and here's the other part, if the adult notices, it does make an impact, okay? Requesting feedback, again, there's slides with more information. I'll let you look at those. There's lots of ways to get feedback, but by requesting feedback, you're actually signaling a few different things. The first of which is, I care enough to ask you about your opinion. I don't know about y'all, but when I was teaching every day, not just teaching once or twice a week, it meant a lot when someone showed interest in what I was teaching. And one of the very easy ways in which you can do that is to be like, hey, yo, man, this is what happened. How am I doing? I don't know about you, but as a first-year teacher, I was like, right? I was actually very, very happy. And I needed it because I was not a very good teacher, okay? The next thing is asking good questions. And you might say, well, Chris, I heard that there's no such thing as a bad question. But then I lived more than 2 days. There are lots of bad questions. Please open your books to page 77. Right here, page 77. Open your book to page 77. Again, acknowledge something. They raise their hands. Hey, what page? And so what I mean by good questions is this. Questions that are designed not only to meet your need as a student in terms of knowledge, but it's also, again, communicating to the adult. Here's what I teach students to do. Whenever you ask a question, show that you've been paying attention. So I know you just said that this was the number one reason why this happened. However, I was watching a YouTube video, or should I say TikTok video, and they said this. Now the teacher's like, kid's paying attention. And for the student, they're actually engaging into the instruction, and they're actually presenting some information that they know, right? So again, when you look at the culturally responsive, culturally sustaining literature, right? Using, validating what folks bring with them, whether it's some deeply held cultural thing that their family's been doing for generations or something they learned from TikTok. They showed up and connecting it to something that the teacher or other adult was providing, right? And in practice, when students actually do it, it makes a difference, right? I know for me, it makes a difference. Oh, well, let's talk about it, right? And then finally, asking for help. And you're like, asking for help? And I don't mean this in some kind of, far off abstract way. Here's what I mean. And just wonder if you've ever had this occur. So you may be working with someone, it could be a high school student, it could be someone else, and they say, I don't get it. Has that ever happened to you? Despite your best efforts, the eloquent way in which you present things, all the scaffolding that you do every time you teach something, you're like, I don't get it. And so you come over and say, I heard you. Thanks for waiting. What don't you get? And the student's like, I don't know. I don't get it. Now, this often goes back and forth, and without acting that out for you, I'll just say this. I contend that in a classroom full of students with various needs, if I, as a student, take up 5 minutes of your time with you trying to figure out what I need and then providing it, guess who I'm not going to see again during that class session? And the reality is, it's not because the teacher's cold-hearted, it's because they recognize I've got 29, 34, 41, however many students you have in your class, other students to support. And within a given time period, if I spend 5 minutes with you, guess who I was not supporting? It's a real thing, right? And so when you ask for help, there's a way to do it. I say, if you can't do anything else, point in the general direction of the help you need. Like, I don't get this, right? Give me a paragraph, a page number, something, because I cannot spend 20 minutes trying to figure out what you need and then actually help you, okay? I can't do that and support the rest of the class, okay? So like I said, on the ensuing slides, there's more information about them, but I'll just say this, just to kind of summarize. When you can get students to do these things regularly, there is an observable difference in the teacher in terms of how much the teacher interacts with the student. but this is true under a special condition. The teacher has to know that the student is trying to do these things, because otherwise they don't really notice sometimes. They're like, yeah, the kid's trying to talk to me for some reason now. The kid knows I don't like them. They don't like me. Why is the kid asking me about how he did? And you're like, no. We're teaching the student to ask. And what we need, as was said in the last presentation, is for you to at least be somewhat supportive in their attempt at this new thing. All right? So the other thing that this becomes is this. We talk about what does it take for you to do something new? Well, you need to try it. You need to have some success in it. But you also need an environment that allows that. So the academic seminar class is kind of like the place where you can try, right? And you're never going to get a harsh critique on your attempt to do any of these things that we're trying to teach you. And the goal is to build up your skills and then try it out in the real world, okay? And when I talk about some of these communication pieces, we don't just say, go do this. We actually ask teachers, hey, these are the things that we've been working on. Have you seen any of them? Has a kid ever asked how they were doing? Do they say hi? What's up? How's it going? They do any of these things? And again, we do this via typically a survey. Very, very short. But do you observe as a teacher or another adult any of these things that we're working on? Okay? All right. So all this stuff, right, if you want the kind of, nice mnemonic to remember this, I say be sure, be early, be specific. Give me enough time to actually help you. Make sure you've checked your own resources before you start asking me questions, right? And then don't just say I need help or I don't understand. Give me a little bit more so I can actually help you. Because again, the longer I take with you, despite my best intentions as an adult service provider, it's less time that I can spend with others, right? All right. So some of you might be saying, what's the scope and sequence of this? Here's an example. And this is over 12 weeks of when you would introduce the skills and when you would have students practice the skills and when you would try to get into what they call a maintenance phase, where the expectation is, with not a lot of help from you as the adult, the student is using these skills, right? So again, this might look a little bit different based on the assessed needs of the students. So if they're really, really struggling in a particular area, you might say that maybe is one of the first things that I teach within a academic term, okay? So again, make it fit the needs of your students. Supported work completion, here's the thing, and I know this from a lot of work in schools. One of the benefits of teaching a set of skills and organizing supports from experts is that in a typical high school, for a student, let's say that's fully in gen ed, doesn't have to be a student with a disability or anything, they're going to have a various set of things that they need. And when I think about hiring decisions that I've weighed in on, right, when they invite me and say, hey, help us interview candidates, what I don't typically find are a lot of teachers that have advanced placement or early college level skills in the full range of academic subjects that students in high school take. With that stated, you don't need the super academic who has, again, undergraduate level skills and everything to teach this course. What you do is teach a set of skills, identify maybe the academic area that this teacher actually has some skills in, but organize the experts to provide support in, let's say, trigonometry, right? Or English composition, right? Or, even have one kid in AP French. The teacher was like, I can't help you. But I can't help you know what assignment you haven't completed. Can't help you with any of the words, right? So again, you're not necessarily going to hire someone with all of the skills that as a student may need as they actually do their work. So again, be realistic, okay? So how do we do it? Have a team. You probably already have this team if you have any part of your tier 1 in place. We don't want one person to do this because what happens to the one person that is charged with doing the good work? They get offered other opportunities. Or you just burn them out. Those are the ones we don't talk about as much, right? We use them up and then we say, they used to do this. I don't know why they stopped, right? And so again, you want to have an administrator because you need someone that can actually make the decisions, not just recommend it. You need to talk about behavior. You need to have teachers Need to have, if possible, a school counselor or psychologist to talk about, again, some of those pieces of the social emotional part that could be addressed or could at least be acknowledged as part of this course. And then you need to have the help of content area teachers, at least one. But I would say have a cadre of other content area teachers, because in high school, I can't fake every area, right? Kid comes to me and saying, all right, I'm in pre-calculus. I'm like, I used to be in that 30 years ago. And I've gone a path that I've never had to use it again. I'm probably not the one to help you with this, right? And I have to actually acknowledge that. So you need people who have the expertise, particularly in some areas that the teacher may not, okay? All right, how do we implement this? We start off with a class if possible. So either creating a class, or what I've seen a lot of high schools do is they modify a class that's already credit accruing. Right, so if you've got some kind of version of study hall, whatever you call it, and students can choose that as an elective, then I would say maybe target that course rather than trying to build a new class and get it to actually accrue credits, okay? That credit part's big for students, especially if students are beyond 9th grade and they're like, if I do this, I don't get to do this, and I need that to graduate, okay? All right, so here, I'm just gonna go beyond this. You got to figure out students, and your system should help with all this. What's your need, right? So you can do this formally by looking at your standard universal data around attendance, behavior, course stuff, and anything that you're also looking at for the social emotional aspects of it, okay? You can also just do like a survey of your teachers. Here are the things that are being taught. What proportion of your class do you believe would benefit from something like this? Just to get a sense of what's the need. Because you always have to be thinking about what's your capacity, right? Sounds good, but what if you had 300 students? Do you have the ability to serve that many students? Maybe not. So again, what's the need? What's your capacity? All right? Okay. So with the advent of, again, maybe not here, but at least where I'm at, some people have stayed online. And what I've found is that this can actually be adapted to online learning. Not that it's your primary concern, but I just use this as a way of getting you to think, how do you actually access more students that are in need? Right? One person said attendance. Well, attendance online is also attendance. Okay? So how might you provide the support to students that for whatever reason aren't coming into the school building on a full-time basis? Okay? I'd also say one of the benefits of doing this stuff during the age of distance learning or online learning was I recommended, and people actually did it, they created libraries of these lessons so that new teachers or substitute teachers weren't left to their own devices to try to figure it out without a lot of training, okay? So again, if you think about how do you sustain some of this stuff, it's thinking about the future and how do you build these things and keep these things for others, okay? Last thing I'll say before I actually open this up for questions, feel free to ask me hard ones because the time is going to run out. So then you have to email me if you want an answer. All right, so because this is part of a system, we don't want to just say if we're doing it, it's working, right? Nah, not really. I've learned from cooking that there's lots of recipes that I thought I followed. The outcome, not so great, okay? That souffle, never inflated, okay? Those things never got crispy. And so when we talk about whether or not we understand or know whether this is working, there are some things that we can do, okay? So within academic seminar, and this is part of the curriculum that's freely available online, there are some evaluation and outcome metrics that you would look at if you were quote unquote grading students' performance in academic seminar, right? So attendance, use of the skills, increase in work completion, decrease in grades of D or F. These are things that we use both individually, but also systemically to say, is this course, is this support working, right? You would expect the percentage of students with D or F to decrease if this is working, right? We also have self-assessments, and that self-assessment of both instructors, but also of students. Do you use these things? Do you recognize this as being different? Is it helpful? One of the things I found is when a student says, Man, yeah, this would be really important. I don't do it. Why do you not do it? Not because it's hard, just because why should I, right? And then, again, thinking about the teacher assessment of are you actually teaching and supporting the things within the curriculum, okay? Because just because you have a class doesn't mean people are actually doing it. And I have unfortunately observed that for myself. So here's an example of something like a behavioral report card. And again, this could be a physical card. This could just be something that you do as an activity where you have certain tasks you see along the left side, and then you have these self-ratings of them, right? Just as a way of gathering data in a semi-formal way from the students themselves, okay? We've got more, again, follow directions, all these things. These can vary a little bit based on what you've actually taught or the particular concerns for that student, okay? All right. So if we look at participation within the class, we've got these different activities, and if you have to go to this level of granularity in terms of what activities or actions are worth points, here's a potential breakdown, okay? If you're trying to justify any grades. So progress monitoring of, again, those big things, attendance, behavior, grades, and whatever outcome measures you're using for any of your other things, whether it's an SEL program, whether it's trauma-informed, whatever you're using as a team to identify the needs and to monitor progress for all your students, you may also use within this class. Okay? And then data specific to academic seminar. Do people come? Do they do stuff? Again, percentage of D's and F's and all that good stuff. Okay? Because I'm trained as a researcher, I have to say or have to ask, do we have a measure of fidelity? Meaning, are we doing the things that we intended to do? Because that tends to help when making decisions about whether something has worked or not, okay? And then, of course, student outcomes, the reason why, ostensibly, we're all here, right? Are students making progress? May I say it, are they learning? Do they not hate any aspect of school today, okay? All right, so evaluation, if you were to say, here's our plan, here's what we plan to do, you can use these things and answer them to talk about, is the course functioning as designed? Again, all these materials are available online for free. I'll show you where in a second. We've got student outcomes. Here's an example of something that's actually shared or been shared within a Tier 2 meeting as a way of evaluating, again, the efficacy of the academic seminar class. So you'll see how many students are in it. Students with a D or F, assignment completion above or equal to 85%. Okay? And so again, it's one way on a Tier 2 level to have an idea of how this is functioning, right? Okay. So one of the things that I want you to consider, and we won't take a lot of time, is what data do you or the people you work with already track, right? And so they got to do attendance. They're going to have some kind of behavior metric. They got to do something around credits or grades. But what are the other sources of data that are used or could be used to support students, okay? What systems are in place? What systems would need to be added or enhanced to actually do the progress monitoring piece of this intervention, okay? Or any other Tier 2 intervention. And what are some barriers, and I mean real barriers, to actually collecting and using these data within your specific site, right? Because you're going to have to plan for all of those when implementing. All right. Final recommendations, if you were to think about Tier 2 in general or academic seminars specifically, if you're going to do it as a class, keep the classes relatively small. And I know that might be hard, but to put 40 students in this class means that you're just going to be presenting. That's what that means, okay? If student referrals, all right, are specific, okay? You want to be thinking about what are the supports that are already available that we may be managed through academic seminar, instead of thinking if we just hire the right person that knows everything, then we can do it. I don't know who those people are, okay? And do not remove the academic self-management focus of the class, because what people tend to do is say, all right, we just need more time for work completion. Great. If that's all the students need, then maybe you don't need an academic seminar class. But if students aren't demonstrating the skills that have been outlined or the other ones that you may have added or substituted, then you want to make sure that you're actually teaching and supporting those. The goal is not to just say, someone help me do my work. The goal is actually to build a skill set that students can hopefully take with them beyond your school, okay? All right, so got a few minutes. I left a few, not too many, but I left a few minutes for questions. There's my name. Feel free to call me Chris. There's my email. Feel free to use it. There's my phone number. You can use it if you want to. I will not answer it, but I will get the message eventually. I'm not the only person doing this work. Lots of others are doing it, maybe better. Dr. Jessica Swain Bradway, who's now on the West Coast with me, co-author of this curriculum, right? And again, if you want to know what this curriculum is, you want to access it, again, for free, go to pbis.org, type in academic seminar. And what you'll get is the full curriculum and access to any presentations about the content. So if you're thinking about, could we use this? Where do we start? Start there, and then feel free to follow up with me or Jessica about specific questions. With all of that stated, are there questions from you that I can answer in 3.5 minutes?
There were a couple questions online about your thoughts on adaptations for middle school or elementary school if you have students who need the same skill sets.
I would say I've seen it in middle school more so than elementary school, but I think at the end of the day, the ideas are sound. Teach the skills that are lacking, support those within a context in which students can be successful. I would say for younger students, think about the kind of supported time where you're really helping and prompting them. Just plan for that being longer, right? So if I'm thinking about a 5th grade student, they might actually not have the skills, as opposed to have the skills and just choose not to use them. So I would have a little bit more time to practice fewer things more frequently the younger the students are.
Thanks. Another online question was, who typically does the planning for the seminar? Are teachers and staff paid for teaching this additional course? Is it part of their teacher prep course time?
If you create it as a course, it's part of someone's workload. And I think that's where people have been most successful. If this is just an add-on, or in high school, hey, if you come early, you can do this, doesn't work as well even if you compensate the teacher. So if it's an actual course, and like someone was saying over here, if it's built into an intervention time or block within your master's schedule, tends to work out better, and that becomes part of a teacher's load, and that teacher gets as much credit or whatever as they would for any other course that they teach.
And then the other question that came up was, do you have any recommendations for books or articles on feedback? That was when you were talking about not everyone likes public feedback.
I would say yes. I would literally just look up how to give feedback, how to give culturally responsive feedback. There's lots of things. Here's the best thing I could tell you. I can sit here and give you a list of, here are groups who tend to like this more, or here's our age groups or whatever. I don't like that much. What I do like is to ask students, right? And so I would say build in mechanisms to get feedback from your students about, hey, here's the thing that I'm going to try to do. I want to acknowledge you for the hard work you're doing. You want me to do that real loud? You want me to do that kind of like just, right? How would you like me to do that? And I think particularly as students get older, that becomes a catalyst for them to think about their own needs and kind of what they want from the adults. Because my contention is students, and I know they do, they shape in many ways the behavior of the adults. I want them to do it intentionally in a way that actually is supportive, right? Any questions from people in the room? Just gonna blame the lack of questions on the after lunch part, so don't worry. If you don't want to do it publicly, because that might not be how you get down, I want to provide choice. Feel free to send me an email, okay? And again, if you don't have all your words together, just be like, hey, Chris, I've been thinking, that's all I got. At which point I'll point you to the slide about be specific. I won't do that, I'll just think it. But again, if you have any questions, concerns, take a look at the curriculum online, see if that might be something you're interested in. And again, I don't charge for answering emails or having Zoom conversations, right? So feel free to consider me a resource. All right, that should be my time, right? Yay.
Me in thanking Dr. Pinckney.